So we've got a Powersmart 24-inch snowblower here this morning. The customer brought in and said it didn't start, or it won't stay running if it did start. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to diagnose and get this taken care of here this morning. The model number is a DB7651. Now it does have an LCT engine on it. Very common model on these, but they make a few different styles. They make a couple with a adjustment here for the throttle underneath the choke. They also make one that has a choke in the front. So depending on which model yours is, this may vary just a tiny bit, but they're all pretty much the same style as far as the carburetor goes. The cleaning process and the diagnosis is the same. So this is a PW2 HK 10650 178EA BG0QUVE1M, and now that's the model number, the full thing across the front there. So that it's either found there, otherwise sometimes it's on the side of the engine on either side of the block. Very common for it to be either place. So the first thing I like to do on anything you're diagnosing is check the oil. You want to make sure there's a good oil level in it, that it doesn't smell like gas or anything like that. That one smells good. Doesn't seem like great oil. We're going to want to switch that out before we send it out to the customer, but as far as for testing, it's plenty adequate. So if it smells like gas, you're going to want to address the carburetor before you even try to start it. So a lot of times what you'll have to do is you'll have to take the plug out, and you'll have to completely flush the firing chamber and flush the crankcase out of that fuel, replace the oil and all that good stuff. This one here, it looks like it's got a nice, so it's got an NGK spark plug. Usually if they are torch spark plugs, I'll just go ahead and replace those straight off the top. No reason to use those whatsoever. They're not in real good shape. Now this looks like it's been throwing some fuel out of it or something. Otherwise it wouldn't have that all over the exhaust like that. But again, the customer did say that he messed with it, so I'm not sure exactly what he did. So normally they don't tell you that, but in this case he did. So what we're going to do is we're going to check the spark first. So you can do that by taking the spark plug out, holding it against the block here or any of the metal, and looking for a spark physically in between the middle and the tab while you're pulling it over. Now if that's the case, you want to make sure that there's not any fuel inside the firing chamber first, because if there is, you can start a fire pretty easily by turning it over, and then the fuel comes out and ignites right here. Very, very common issue. That is actually the way that I've started the most fires in here. I've started quite a few over the years, but luckily we have fire extinguishers all around. Anyway, we use a spark checker nowadays, just to shows low, okay, or high. Let's check that real quick. So it's showing good spark. We know we have good spark to the unit. It's not starting at this point though, so we know that we have an issue with it not getting fuel, or at least we figure we do. It sounds like it's getting good compression at this point, so we're going to go a little bit further and do a little bit further testing. Now the choke knob, I'm going to put it on choke or on start here. The choke knob just comes straight up and off. You can use a screwdriver or anything in this, kind of pry below. Then to get this cover off, we need to remove the 6 bolts from the front. There's 2 here on the carb, 2 on the muffler, and then you've got 2 that attach to the housing around the fuel tank. Now once we've got all those off, you can just kind of lift your muffler straight up a little bit, and then this pulls kind of out and towards you and around. So that'll get you out of the way. Now we're to the carburetor. Now down here is your primer line. You can pull it straight down and off, and at that point you're all free. This whole housing is free. So from there we can put some starting fluid, or you can put some gas on the intake of the carburetor, and we can go ahead at this point, and what we're doing is we're bypassing the carburetor. We're giving it an auxiliary shot of fuel to see if that's going to make the unit run. Now if it does run on this, you know that the only thing you're missing from the equation is the fuel. If it doesn't run, one of your valves or something could be stuck, your timing could be off, there could be a bunch of different things, but this tells you if your carburetor is in fact the issue. So we know it fires up on that. We know this thing will run if we were getting a good amount of fuel to it, a good fuel mix. So we're gonna replace the carburetor on this, customer said he's already messed with it, so we're not going to go any further with the carb. I'm not even going to take it apart. 9 times out of 10, once they clean them and do some things like that, you never really know what they've done. Doesn't look too bad from the outside here, but again, I don't really like to mess with them at that point once somebody's been in there. Now, in order to get this piece here that protects the carburetor off, the carburetor has to come towards you some. So if the seal at the back's real good, it won't want to come towards you, but it's got to come towards you a little bit in order for you to pull that up and off. So the carb's got to be like such. To get the spring off the back along with the governor linkage, you've got to pull it towards you. You've got to kind of move the throttle plate here, and then you can take the spring up and off. And the governor linkage, it just kind of comes straight up and off also. But if the carburetor is not out towards you far enough, that's hard to do. So a lot of times it's easier to take the fuel line off first, but I've been doing it a long time, so I kind of pull everything at once. Now we're going to drain this fuel. We don't know where this fuel came from, so anytime you don't know the origin of it, you want to drain it and start fresh. We do every time in a situation like this. You know, the customer said he drained and flushed it. He thinks it's good fuel, but all right. So we're gonna let that all drain out, and then we're gonna flush this tank out real good so there's nothing left in it. He's got this thing just completely full up top also, so it's all the way to the full mark. You don't want it quite that full. There's a filter in here that actually, the full mark is up to the red piece in this filter if you're looking inside the tank. So if you have it any more full than that, and it's cold outside, your fuel's cold, and you go into a warm garage, it'll start leaking because that fuel's gonna expand. That can cause a fire or anything else when that happens. This carburetor does not look bad, but again, one of those things where once the customers mess with it, I don't want to go any further with it and add to the issue. These carburetors are pretty cheap. Now this is an LCT carburetor. It's an 03121 kit. It is an aftermarket that we're using. This comes with everything you need in it. It comes with all the gaskets and stuff like that. I'm not going to use any of those. We use our Honda gasket as a replacement. And that is a 16221-ZH8-801. Now, that's for the gasket directly behind the carburetor here. Now, if the other one is broken, if the one that's behind this plastic plate is broken, you're going to want to use the one that came with that kit if you've got the kit. Now, I don't replace that gasket unless this is loose. So unless that seal has been broken, I don't replace it. And that's just something that we've learned over the years, is there's no reason to break it and then you've got to scrape that gasket material off forever if it's not leaking there already. So just kind of one of those things where it's, why mess with it if you don't have to type of thing. We know it's sealing good, or at least it was at one point. And it doesn't look like the customer's been in that far. So we're just gonna take a razor blade and scrape this other one off. Got a nice fresh one here, so I'm not scratching everything up. That other one was kind of, it was just out of my knife, out of my pocket, and it was kind of leaving some marks behind. You don't want to do that. You want this, you really don't want to take anything off of this. You just want to get the gasket material off the back. All right, that's in pretty good shape. Go ahead and put our new, and we use these Honda gaskets because they're a little bit thicker, a little bit nicer than these ones that come with it. Now these will usually work, but a lot of times, as this is, it's kind of brittle, kind of broken, so a lot of times we don't mess with those. And you can double them up if you want also. That's not going to hurt anything. Anytime with a carburetor, when we replace it, we always check inside the bowl. A lot of times you get metal shavings and things like that with whether it's aftermarket or OEM. So gonna want to inspect that. Go ahead and take the bolt out of the bottom. Now we do have a carburetor cleaning video on this that kind of shows you the whole process with cleaning it. So if it looks good enough, if you're taking your old one apart and it looks good enough, see that video as opposed to replacing it. We always like to go ahead and adjust the float here And all you got to do is push that tab in a little bit. That's probably a little too far, but bring it back up a bit. We want it to start about right there, so you want plenty of room. That's almost even a little too far for it to go down, so you can adjust your stop here also, that way it doesn't go quite down as far. All right, so yeah, there we are before it hits, and then it starts pushing against that spring about here. So as long as you're above your hole, you're gonna have plenty of fuel to feed your unit. So it starts sealing about here, and then anywhere below that, anywhere below here, it's going to continue to allow fuel in. That's about perfect. I don't see any metal shavings or anything. We're gonna blow it out. And then we also use a micro drill bit, depending on what CC it is. Yeah, see, this one's plenty big enough, so that's good. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they come a little bit of the wrong size. Look up a jet size if you'd like. On these, I believe they're like a 0.32 is normally what we use. 0.032, of course. All right. I'm gonna blow that out real quick before I put it back together. All right. Perfect. Now we can go ahead and put our, I like to put the spring back on first. You just kind of drag that spring out towards you a little bit and put it back in the hole. See if I can't get a little better view down here real quick. Oop. Put that spring in first. If I can, I think I'm a little too far out. Okay. Now, let's see if we can't get a little better view. Wow. Table today has got some other stuff on it. It doesn't want to move real well. Let's see how that is. Looks pretty good. So again, just this spring, you're going to pull it towards you, put it down in the hole. Then the same thing with the governor. You're just going to have this out, and you're going to find the sweet spot and push it straight down in there. If it's not pulled out like that, though, it's going to be super hard to get down in there. It's not going to want to go real well. But if it is pulled out like this, it'll be super easy. So yeah, that bar is kind of right in the way, isn't it? So once again, spring pulled out towards you, in there first. Usually makes it easier to do it first, in my opinion. And then the governor linkage. It just comes straight up and out depending on where the unit is. So you can do this 4 or 5 more times apparently. All right. Now that we've got that on there, we're gonna go ahead and address the issue with the fuel. Well, we're not quite drained yet, so make sure everything's good to go here. You can tip it back towards you. That's gonna give you all the fuel towards the inlet or towards the shutoff that's on the back of the unit. So we can see a bunch of bubbles coming up now. We know we're about to the point where it's almost out of gas. So that's good. Usually once the bubbles stop, you're pretty much at the end if you're tipping it. It looks like that spring did get a little bit messed up or whatever when the customer originally had it off, but that's just to keep the slack out of the linkage. So it's not a huge deal, but you do want it there, otherwise you will get some surging sometimes out of the unit. Now this gas definitely doesn't look good. It's yellow as can be, even though the customer said it was good. Maybe part of his issue. So again, not too worried about that right now though. I'm gonna blow all this extra fuel out. Now if you don't have an air compressor, yeah, what was coming out of there looked more like water than like fuel at this point. Yeah. I think he had a bunch of water still left in his fuel is what happened here. Probably didn't drain it out all the way or something. Put some fresh stuff in there, but if it's not drained all the way, you still get that water. It even looks like water up top here, how it's kind of pooling. Wow, that's still a lot left in that tank. Normally it'll drain out a lot more. The good part about these tanks though, when you blow into them, it'll blow back up through these holes and let you get it out of there. dry at this point. So what I'm going to do, since it's almost dry, is I'm going to go ahead and throw some more carb cleaner down inside the tank, and this just kind of helps dry everything out. So you do want to be careful though, because it gets kind of nauseous as all this stuff goes up through the air at the same time. What you can do to keep this from all getting airborne is throw a towel in there also. And even without compressed air, that'll kind of soak everything up, as long as it's a clean towel, of course. Kind of soaks everything out that's coming up, as opposed to putting it back into the air. Now whether you're rebuilding this or you're replacing it, it's not going to matter. This process is going to be exactly the same. You're going to want everything out of this tank. You're not going to want anything left. It should be completely dry when you're looking down through there. You should not get any kind of fluid back down in there. If there is, keep going with it. Keep blowing it out. Now I turned my compressor off here a little bit ago, just so it didn't run while I was doing this, but we're almost there anyway, so. See what that looks like on the inside. Oh yeah. Yeah, it's pretty well dry. Pretty well dry. I'm gonna do it just one more time with a little bit of carbon choke cleaner. Clean it all up a little bit. Just kind of dissipates some of that water. It makes it kind of evaporate like it should. Get everything up out of there. All right. Now that we're in a good spot like that, what we'll do is we'll put the fuel line back on. If this fuel line is cracked or anything around the outside here, you're not going to want to reuse it. If it looks bad at all, replace that fuel line at the same time. Now this here is in pretty good shape. It's not exactly got a super lot left to it or anything like that. If there's a bunch of extra room, you can cut it back just a tiny bit. This one has hardly any at this point, so I'm not going to worry about it. But again, to get this back on, pull it towards you just a tiny bit. Make sure this goes in smooth. And then everything kind of pushes back together. Then you've got your two nuts on the front, like a double threaded nut. So those outside bolts screw into them for the housing. All right. Now if you over tighten these, you can ruin that black plastic spacer in back. Be careful about that. I always like to take and grab the throttle spring at this point, the linkage, and make sure that everything's like it should be, and this one is. So if not, you can usually notice at that point that you need to do something a little bit different. So you can go ahead and take the primer line off from the primer and use your new one since it's already on there and comes with it. Install that. And then this just pulls straight up and everything kind of fits back together nice and easy. And then all we have to do is reinstall the bolts. Now the shorter ones are the ones that came out of over here, and you want to make sure that it's the shorter ones that the shorter ones go back in where the carb is. Otherwise, they'll bottom out and they won't tighten down. Make sure it's a shorter two in the front. Honestly, it doesn't matter where the other ones go. Even if you put the long ones where they're not supposed to go, it's not going to make a difference. But the shorter ones are supposed to go here in the muffler, and the longer ones are supposed to go over here to the tank. So we'll put them all back where they're supposed to go. You usually want to start everything before you start tightening anything down. Otherwise, they a lot of times won't line up right. Well, come on now. There we go. Okay, and then the choke piece just sits straight back down on. So we're good to go. I'm going to leave it on start. I'm going to throw some fuel in it, and we'll see how this thing runs now that we got a good carb on it. You can just see how much of this stuff hasn't dried at all up top. Now, if it was good fuel, that stuff would already probably be evaporated. It almost never stays around like that if it's a good quality fuel. So we're gonna also spray off the screen and put it back in. Get all that nasty stuff out of there. Yeah, so we're about exactly where it's supposed to be as far as the level goes. And we'll spray off the top too to make sure there's no fluid or no water or moisture that's back down off this cap into there. All right, now we're on run. Prime it one time. I've let it run here for just I don't know, minute and a half or 2 minutes. It still hasn't burned everything off. There's a bunch of that stuff that whoever the customer messing with it probably just kept pumping fuel up and up and up through it, even though the stuff wasn't good enough to run it off of. It's gonna need ran for probably 10 or 15 minutes at least to stop smoking. I opened the door so it wasn't so smoky in here, but things back to running great. Everything's working how it's supposed to. You can test the primer to see if it's working while it's running by just shooting a shot. You'll hear the difference in the engine while it's running. That's the way you can switch your carburetor out, get this thing back in action. And again, if your carburetor needs clean, see one of our other videos. They've got the full process on there, and this will tell you how to take it apart and get it put back together. So that should get you everywhere you need to go with this thing. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.